The Dominion was a juggernaut, silent, cold, and omnipresent. Its influence stretched across countless systems, and its power was absolute. To defy it was to face certain annihilation. Mira Valen knew this all too well. Once a loyal servant of the regime, she had once believed in the promise of peace the Dominion offered. But that was before she had seen the cost of that peace, the broken minds of those they controlled, and the innocents who were erased for the sake of power. Her escape from the Dominion's grasp had been a careful, calculated act, an intricate dance of hacking into their systems and disappearing into the underworld. Yet Mira had learned that hiding from the Dominion was impossible. Their reach was long, their surveillance unrelenting. But what they did not anticipate was Mira's tenacity, or the network of people she was about to create. In the dusty corners of the galaxy, far from the gleaming spires of Dominion-controlled cities, Mira had made contact with the first members of her resistance. A former Dominion hacker named Kalen, a skilled ex-soldier named Rika, and Dr. Ilara Morn, a psychologist whose expertise in manipulating human behavior had made her a prized asset for the Dominion. Together, they would form the Whisper Network. Their first action was subtle, small acts of sabotage designed to sow doubt among the Dominion's population. They hacked public broadcasts, planting fragments of encrypted messages, like whispers on the wind, speaking of a world where the mind could not be controlled. Each message was a seed planted in the minds of the populace, a flicker of awareness in the darkness. "Do you remember who you are?" was the question that echoed through the encrypted frequencies. It was simple, haunting, and powerful. Mira was no stranger to the power of suggestion. She had once wielded it herself as a member of the Dominion's elite research team, using neural interfaces to manipulate the very thoughts of soldiers, civilians, and even high-ranking officials. She had helped build the system that now enslaved her people. It had been for the greater good, they'd said, but the greater good had become a prison of the mind, where free will was the illusion and conformity the reality. But as the first whispers of rebellion spread, something unexpected happened. The resistance gained momentum. A former military officer named Jace, who had been trained by the Dominion to quell uprisings, secretly turned against his commanders after witnessing the horrors the Dominion had wrought on his people. He defected to Mira's cause, bringing with him valuable intel on Dominion military strategies and the locations of high-value targets. Jace's information was invaluable, but his presence in the group posed a risk. He was an expert in tracking and eliminating resistance cells. If they couldn't trust him, their plan would fall apart before it even began. To Mira's surprise, trust was something that could be built, even in a world where betrayal was common currency. Jace proved himself loyal through actions, not words. He helped stage covert strikes against Dominion supply lines, weakening the regime's ability to maintain control over the far-flung colonies. Their small acts of rebellion began to send ripples through the population, the first signs that the Dominion's iron grip could be loosened. The Dominion's response was swift and brutal. They began rounding up suspected dissenters, executing them in public to quell any notion of rebellion. The streets were filled with fear, and the air crackled with tension. The people were scared, but they were also awakening. Mira could see it in the eyes of every civilian, every rebel who risked their life to spread the message. The time had come to act, but the risk was greater than ever. As Mira looked out from the dimly lit safe house where they gathered, she knew that the war would not be won with brute force. This revolution would be won through subtlety, through whispers in the dark. The Dominion had spent centuries tightening its grip on humanity, but Mira knew one thing with certainty: the human spirit could not be subdued forever. "The first step is always the hardest," she said, turning to her comrades. "But once we take it, they'll never stop asking who's behind the whisper. And when they ask, we'll be ready." The first whispers of rebellion had taken root, but Mira knew the battle was far from won. The Dominion was no stranger to insurgency. Their surveillance network stretched to every corner of Earth and beyond, and their agents, the Silent Ones, were like shadows in the night, ever watchful, ever deadly. These elite operatives, genetically enhanced and trained to track down any threat, had once been her colleagues. Now they were the enemy. Mira sat at a makeshift table in the dimly lit basement of an abandoned factory, the base of operations for the Whisper Network. Around her, a handful of rebels worked tirelessly, tapping into Dominion communications and mapping out strategic points for their next moves. Each success, each small act of sabotage, had been a calculated risk, but it was paying off. The whispers were growing louder. The population was starting to question the Dominion's narrative, and the cracks in their control were beginning to show. Kalen, the former Dominion hacker, was the first to notice it. "The signal's spreading faster than we anticipated," he said, his fingers flying over the keys of his terminal. "The encrypted messages are getting through. People are talking. We need to double our efforts." Mira glanced at the screen. Kellen's eyes were wide with excitement as he tracked the growing surge of dissent across the galaxy. The encrypted messages, once isolated in small, unassuming pockets of society, were now showing up in the largest urban centers. It was like a virus, spreading in secret, bypassing Dominion firewalls, infiltrating the neural systems of the populace. But with every victory, there were losses. Rika, the ex-soldier who had joined their cause after witnessing the Dominion's brutal tactics firsthand, grimly reported that several of their cells had been discovered and wiped out. "The Silent Ones are getting closer. We can't keep hiding forever," she warned. Mira knew Rika was right. As the rebellion grew, the Dominion's response would become more violent, more systematic. They couldn't rely on subtlety alone for much longer. The time for whispers was running out. The network needed to evolve into something stronger, something the Dominion couldn't ignore. "We need to hit them where it hurts," Mira said, her voice steady with resolve. "We need to take down their core infrastructure. If we can cripple their communications, their ability to track us, it will buy us time to launch a full-scale assault." Alara Morn, the former Dominion psychologist turned ally, leaned forward. "You're suggesting we target their central processing hubs, the ones controlling the neural amplification systems? It's risky. They'll have every defensive measure in place." "I know," Mira replied, "but without those hubs, the Dominion can't control the minds of billions. If we can disrupt their signal, we'll cripple them. And if we hit the heart of their operation, the rest of the galaxy will know the truth." The plan was dangerous, but it was their only option. They would infiltrate a heavily fortified Dominion facility, hidden deep within the outskirts of a metropolis on Earth. The facility was a hub for neural communication, where the Dominion's influence on the population was monitored and maintained. It was also the very heart of their mind control infrastructure. The resistance rallied behind the plan, knowing that their chances of survival were slim. Mira and her team would face not only the Silent Ones, but also an army of Dominion soldiers, all guarding the most vital secret of the regime. But Mira had come to understand something the Dominion never had: the power of the human spirit. People were starting to resist, to question, to defy. And that, she knew, was the beginning of their downfall. As they prepared for the operation, Mira felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. They were no longer just fighting for survival. They were fighting for humanity's future. It was no longer about one woman's revenge or the destruction of a corrupt government. It was about the freedom of every person who had been enslaved by the Dominion's lies. This was no longer just a whisper in the dark. It was a revolution that would echo through the stars. "Ready?" she asked, looking at each of her comrades, their faces grim but determined. "Ready," Callan replied, tapping a final sequence into his terminal. "Then let's make sure the world hears us," Mira said, turning toward the exit. "This fight won't be silent anymore." And with that, the Whisper Network began its most dangerous mission yet. The plan was set. Mira and her team would infiltrate the Dominion's facility under the cover of night, using a series of stolen Dominion uniforms to blend in with the regular flow of traffic. The operation was meticulously timed. Every move had to be precise, every detail accounted for. There was no room for error. If they failed, the Whisper network would be exposed, and the rebellion would be crushed before it had a chance to truly take flight. But as Mira prepared to leave the safe house, her mind kept returning to one thought. The Dominion wasn't just her enemy, it had become personal. The loss of her brother, Alden, was still fresh in her heart. She had grown up with him, trained alongside him, and watched him slowly disappear into the very system she had helped create. His death had been a blow, one that had shattered the last vestiges of loyalty she had to the Dominion. But it wasn't just that. Mira had uncovered something darker, something far more sinister. Alden hadn't just been killed, he had been erased. His mind had been scrubbed clean by the Dominion's neural processors, and his memories, the man he had been wiped away completely. Mira's brother had become a blank slate, a husk of a person. And the worst part? It was her own research that had made it possible. She had helped design the technology that allowed the Dominion to manipulate minds. Alden had been a casualty of that same technology. The pain of that betrayal weighed heavily on her, but it also fueled her resolve. This mission, this revolution, wasn't just for humanity. It was for Alden, for all the people the Dominion had turned into ghosts. As the team made their way through the shadows of the city, Mira found herself staring ahead, her mind far from the present. She was thinking about the past, about how she had once believed in the Dominion's promise of peace. The illusion had been shattered, and now there was no turning back. But what was the cost of freedom? How many lives would be lost in this struggle? The thought gnawed at her, but she couldn't afford to dwell on it. Not now, not when they were so close. The Dominion's facility was surrounded by a labyrinth of security measures, laser grids, motion sensors, and armed guards at every entrance. But Mira had been a part of that system. She knew how it worked. The team moved swiftly, bypassing the outer layers of security with ease. But the deeper they went, the more dangerous the stakes became. There were no second chances in this place. The silence of their movements felt deafening, each step a reminder that the price of failure was not just their lives, but the lives of the people they were trying to free. They reached the central core of the facility without incident, but that was when the real test began. Mira could feel the weight of the plan bearing down on her. They were inside the belly of the beast now. The central hub, where the Dominion's neural amplification systems were housed, was heavily guarded, beyond anything she had anticipated. It was then that the first betrayal struck. Jace, the ex-soldier who had become one of her most trusted allies, hesitated. For a brief moment, Mira caught a flicker of something in his eyes, an uncertainty, an unease. She barely had time to process it before the alarm blared through the facility, loud and jarring. "Trap," Jace muttered, his voice low and resigned. Before anyone could react, Dominion soldiers flooded into the hallway, blocking every exit. The team was surrounded, and there was no way out. Mira's heart sank. The rebellion had been compromised, and now they were caught in a deadly game of cat and mouse. It was clear that Jace had been the leak, the traitor in their midst. But the question remained, was he working for the Dominion, or had he been coerced? Was he trying to save his own skin, or was there something more? "Mira," Rika said, her voice filled with fury, "we have to move. We don't have much time." Mira looked at her team, each one of them tense, ready for the fight. Despite the betrayal, despite the danger, the resolve in their eyes didn't waver. They were not just fighting for their own survival anymore. They were fighting for something much greater. Jace's face hardened as he met Mira's gaze. "There's no time for second chances. Get to the core now." Mira's breath caught in her throat. He had led them into a trap, but now he was offering a way out. Was it a last-ditch effort to redeem himself, or was there more to his actions than he was letting on? As Mira nodded and motioned to the others to follow her, she realized something. In this war, no one was free of sin. The lines between friend and foe were blurred, and the price of betrayal was steep. But there was no turning back. Not now. The revolution would continue, whatever it cost. The chaos inside the Dominion facility was overwhelming. Mira's heart raced as she led her team through the labyrinth of halls, their every step heavy with the weight of imminent danger. The alarms had already echoed through the building, a siren that could only mean one thing: they were hunted, and there was no escape unless they completed their mission. The traitor among them, Jace, had been the key to their downfall, but now his actions had somehow become their lifeline. His offer to lead them deeper into the heart of the Dominion facility wasn't one of redemption, but of necessity. "Move!" Mira shouted, urging the others forward. She could see the flickering lights of Dominion soldiers advancing, their heavy footsteps echoing from the corridors ahead. Jace had bought them a few precious minutes, but it was clear that the rebellion's window of opportunity was rapidly closing. The Dominion soldiers were ruthless, trained to kill without hesitation. Every soldier knew that rebellion was anathema to the system, and the punishment for dissent was immediate and fatal. Mira's team, even with their skills and training, was outmatched in a direct confrontation. But they had something the Dominion didn't: desperation, ingenuity, and the will to fight for something greater than survival. Callan, who had been furiously hacking into the Dominion systems, shouted over his shoulder, "I've located the core. It's 2 levels down. We need to move quickly or—" Before he could finish, the blast doors ahead of them opened, revealing a squadron of Dominion soldiers, weapons raised. Mira's instincts kicked in. Without missing a beat, she grabbed the nearest object, a large metal rod, and hurled it down the corridor, creating a momentary distraction. "Now!" she shouted. Reika was the first to move, charging forward with deadly precision. She was a blur of motion, her combat training evident in the fluid way she took down the first few soldiers. Alara followed close behind, her hands a blur as she disabled the nearest set of Dominion security drones with a few deft keystrokes from her handheld device. Meanwhile, Mira focused on the larger goal, the core. She knew that if they didn't shut it down now, all their efforts would have been in vain. The entire facility would lock down, and they would be trapped like rats in a cage. As they continued to fight their way through the compound, Mira's thoughts turned back to Alden. The face of her brother haunted her, his memory a constant reminder of the Dominion's cruelty. She had seen it in his eyes before he'd been erased, the vacant, hollow look that came with their process. The Dominion had turned him into a puppet, a machine with no will of its own. Mira had helped make that possible. It was a fact she couldn't escape, and it fueled her determination to see this mission through, no matter the cost. They reached the main access terminal for the core, but it was surrounded by thick, reinforced walls and multiple layers of security. It seemed impenetrable, and for a moment, Mira's heart sank. Were they too late? Would they fail now, just when they were so close? But then Callan's voice broke through the tension, sharp and confident. "I've bypassed the security. Give me 10 seconds." The seconds felt like hours as Mira watched him work, fingers flying across his console, his brow furrowed in concentration. Time was slipping away, and with every second, the Dominion was closing in. The sound of boots on the floor grew louder, closer. There was no more room for error. 5 seconds, Callan muttered. Mira's mind raced. She knew the risks. If they couldn't shut down the core now, it would send a pulse through the entire facility, alerting the Dominion to their exact location. They would be cornered, and the rebellion would be over before it had even truly begun. 3 seconds, Callan said, his voice tight with strain. In those final moments, Mira could almost feel her brother's presence, a ghost standing beside her, urging her to finish what she had started. She could still hear the echoes of his voice, faint but insistent. "Don't let them win." "Done," Callan shouted. The hum filled the air, low and menacing. For a moment, everything stood still, and then the entire facility shuddered. The lights flickered, then went out entirely, leaving them in darkness. The hum of machinery came to a halt as the Dominion's neural amplifiers, along with all their surveillance, went offline. The core was offline. The heart of the Dominion's power was in chaos. Mira breathed a sigh of relief, but it was short-lived. The facility was still locked down, and the Dominion forces would be upon them in minutes. The mission had succeeded, but their escape was anything but guaranteed. "Move now," Mira commanded. They sprinted through the corridors, their bodies tense with exhaustion and adrenaline. There was no time to savor the victory, not yet. The Dominion would come for them with everything it had. But for the first time in years, Mira felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The Dominion's grip on Earth had been shattered, even if only for a moment. And in that moment, the people of Earth had been set free. But the fight was far from over. The rebellion had only just begun. The euphoria of their small victory was short-lived. Mira and her team navigated the darkened corridors of the Dominion facility, their footsteps echoing in the silence that followed the power failure. They had done the impossible. They had taken down the heart of the Dominion's control over the planet, disrupting the neural systems that had enslaved billions. But the cost was looming, and the path ahead was fraught with peril. The Dominion would retaliate. They always did. Mira's pulse raced as she moved swiftly through the maze of hallways, trying to push the weight of her thoughts aside. They had one chance to escape. The facility was crawling with Dominion forces, their boots pounding the metal floors, their voices echoing off the walls as they scrambled to reestablish control. Mira had no doubt they would hunt her and her team down with ruthless efficiency. "Status?" she called over her comm device. "Core shutdown confirmed," Callan responded, his voice sharp. "We've done the damage, but we don't have long. I've disabled their internal communications, but the outer defenses are already being reactivated. If we're not out in the next 5 minutes, we'll be trapped." 5 minutes, Mira repeated, her breath coming in short, controlled bursts. The clock was ticking. The team moved as one, following the path Callan had mapped out. They were heading for the rear exit, where a hidden transport shuttle was waiting to take them to safety. Mira didn't know if they could make it. She had lost too many people already, and the thought of sacrificing any more to this war was a bitter one. But the cause was bigger than any of them, and she knew it. They rounded a corner, and Reika, the ex-soldier, held up a fist, signaling them to stop. Her sharp eyes were scanning the area, searching for any sign of movement. A moment later, the sound of Dominion soldiers filled the air. Mira's heart skipped a beat. "Damn it," Reika muttered. "We're too exposed. They've got a full squad coming our way." Mira cursed under her breath. The shuttle was just ahead, but they were too close to being caught. They couldn't afford a confrontation. But running wasn't an option. They'd be cornered if they tried to escape through the corridors. Her mind raced as she tried to come up with a solution, a way to slip past without drawing attention. "We'll have to fight," Mira said, the decision hanging heavily in the air. Jace stepped forward, his expression grim but determined. "We've got no choice. I'll take the lead." Mira hesitated. Jace had been the one to betray them earlier, the one who had led them into this trap. Yet now he was stepping forward, offering to put his life on the line. Was it genuine? Was this redemption, or was it another play? She couldn't afford to second-guess him now. They needed all the firepower they could get. "Do it," Mira said, her voice firm. "But no heroics, Jace. We stick to the plan." The team spread out, taking positions behind crates and columns, preparing for the inevitable clash. Jace silently moved to the front, his weapon raised, his body taut with anticipation. Mira felt a twinge of unease, but she pushed it aside. She had learned to trust only in the mission, not in people. The soldiers appeared around the corner, their uniforms gleaming in the low light. Jace fired first, the crack of his blaster echoing in the hall. One soldier fell, but the rest immediately returned fire, forcing the team to take cover. "Fall back," Mira ordered, ducking behind a pillar. The firefight had begun in earnest, and every second felt like an eternity. The sound of blaster fire filled the air, a symphony of destruction that rang out in the narrow corridors. Reiko was quick to react, firing with deadly precision, taking down 2 more soldiers. Alara stayed low, her fingers moving over her portable console, hacking into the Dominion's defense systems to scramble their targeting systems. But the enemy kept coming, and for every soldier they took down, 2 more appeared in the hallway. Mira's pulse hammered in her ears as she assessed their dwindling options. They couldn't hold out much longer. Jace was giving them a few precious moments, but he was taking hits. She saw him stagger, his arm bleeding from a deep cut. But he didn't stop. He kept firing, covering their retreat. "Move!" Mira shouted again, her voice rising above the chaos. "The shuttle's close. We can make it." With a final push, they advanced, each step a struggle. Jace took another hit, but he kept going. The team moved as one, with Rika and Kellen flanking him, offering cover fire as they dashed toward the exit. Alara was the last to leave, her device still working to hack into the Dominion systems to give them a fighting chance. Finally, they reached the shuttle bay. The rear doors opened, revealing their transport vehicle, a sleek, silver craft that would carry them to safety, if they could get inside fast enough. "Go, go!" Mira shouted as they scrambled aboard. As the shuttle's doors closed behind them, Mira looked back one last time, her heart heavy with the knowledge of what they had lost. Jace was barely conscious, his blood staining the floor of the shuttle. The shuttle engines roared to life, lifting them off the ground as the facility's alarms blared in the distance. The danger was far from over. The Dominion would retaliate with even greater force, and their mission had only just begun. But in the silence that followed, as the stars stretched out before them, Mira felt something she hadn't felt in years, the beginning of a true rebellion. And this time, they wouldn't stop. The shuttle hummed as it sliced through the cold expanse of space, the distant lights of Earth dimming behind them. Mira sat in the cockpit, her hands resting lightly on the controls, though her thoughts were far from the ship's trajectory. The team had escaped, but the weight of their victory, and the losses they had suffered, hung over her like a storm cloud. Jace was unconscious, bleeding heavily, and the shuttle's medical supplies were limited. Despite their small victory, the cost was beginning to sink in. She had led them into this fight, and she would be responsible for the consequences. "Jace needs medical attention." Rika's voice cut through the silence, her tone low and tense as she checked his vitals. Mira nodded without turning. "I know." "He's alive, but barely," Rika continued, her eyes locked on the pale, bloodied form of Jace. "We need to get him to a station fast. He won't last long without a proper treatment." Mira's chest tightened. Jace's betrayal still burned inside her, but seeing him like this, vulnerable and broken, made something shift within her. He was a traitor, yes, but he was also a comrade, a member of their team, no matter how fractured their relationship had become. And in this fight, no one could afford to let their personal feelings get in the way. "We'll make it to the nearest supply station. It's a few hours away," Mira said, her voice tight with determination. "Hold on, Jace. Just hold on." The shuttle continued its steady course, and Mira's mind drifted back to the events that had led her to this point. The whispers of revolution had started long before the Corps' shutdown. Long before she had ever imagined betraying the very system she had worked to create. It had all started with her brother Alden. Alden had been a brilliant scientist, a mind capable of creating the very technologies that had allowed the Dominion to subjugate humanity. He had been on the inside, working for the enemy, yet Mira had always believed in him. She had trusted him. But when she found out that Alden had been manipulated, erased, and turned into a puppet for the Dominion's nefarious purposes. Her world had shattered. She could still see his face, those empty eyes that had once held warmth and intelligence, now vacant, hollow. He had no memory of who he was, no connection to the family he had left behind. The Dominion had done that to him, and they had done it to countless others. That realization had torn Mira apart, but it had also driven her to make a choice. To fight, to tear down the empire that had stolen everything from her and so many others. And now she was leading a rebellion with no real plan other than survival. She didn't have all the answers. The path ahead was filled with uncertainty, but there was no turning back. Mira glanced over at Callan, who was seated across from her, his fingers tapping nervously on the edge of his console. He had been instrumental in the core shutdown, but Mira knew his mind wasn't on their mission right now. He had been tracking the Dominion's movements since their escape, trying to predict their next move. And from the grim look on his face, it wasn't good. "They're already mobilizing," Callan said, his voice steady but strained. "The Dominion knows what we did. They're preparing to counterattack, but they're still gathering intel. We've got maybe a day or two before they send a fleet after us." Mira's heart sank. They hadn't even had time to breathe before the next battle loomed. "We need to move quickly, find the next target. Keep the pressure on them. If we stop now, we lose everything." "I know," Callan replied, "but if we keep pushing too fast, we'll stretch ourselves too thin. We can't fight a war without solid intel. We need a base of operations, somewhere we can regroup and plan the next phase." Mira stared out the cockpit window, her thoughts clouded by the weight of their situation. It was true, without a safe haven, they were little more than a scattered group of rebels, easy prey for the Dominion. But where could they go? Earth was no longer safe, not after the facility's destruction. And even if they found a place to hide, it wouldn't be long before the Dominion tracked them down. "There's an old resistance base on the outskirts of the Alpha Cluster," Rika spoke up from behind, breaking Mira's reverie. "It's been abandoned for years, but it's still operational. We could use it to lay low, get some rest, and plan our next move." Mira turned to Rika, considering the suggestion. The Alpha Cluster was remote, far from the Dominion's primary reach. If the base was still intact, it could serve as a refuge. It was risky, but it was their best option. "Set a course," Mira said, her voice firm. "We're going to Alpha Cluster, but keep your eyes open. We don't know who else might be watching." The shuttle changed course, and Mira returned her focus to the controls. As the stars blurred around them, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was coming, something far darker than they had prepared for. The Dominion would not let them get away so easily, and this time they wouldn't be fighting just for survival. They'd be fighting for humanity's future. And Mira knew, deep down, that they were on the edge of a much larger battle, one that would determine the fate of every person in the galaxy. The shuttle cut through the cold expanse of space, leaving behind the fading lights of Earth. The crew, once tense and frantic, had slipped into an uneasy silence. Mira sat at the controls, her hands steady but her mind in turmoil. The Alpha Cluster was their only hope, an isolated region far from the Dominion's watchful eyes. But Mira knew better than to believe in safety. The Dominion would hunt them relentlessly, and they had no illusions that a mere base would keep them hidden forever. As the hours stretched on, Mira watched the stars blur past, a glittering field of possibility and danger. Her thoughts returned to Jace, his face pale and battered in the med bay. She couldn't shake the guilt that gnawed at her every time she looked at him. He had betrayed them, yes, but now he was fighting for survival, just like the rest of them. Could she forgive him? Could she trust him again? The sound of the shuttle's automated system breaking through the silence startled her. A soft chime alerted her to a communication request. "Callan?" Mira asked, turning toward him. "Got something?" Callan's voice was laced with tension. He was hunched over his console, his fingers flying over the screen as he decrypted the incoming data. The Dominion's response is faster than we expected. They're mobilizing a fleet, a full-scale retaliation force. They know we're here. Mira's pulse quickened. How fast? Kalen's eyes flicked up to meet hers, a rare flicker of fear in his usually controlled expression. They'll be within striking distance in less than 20 hours. The news hit Mira like a punch to the gut. 20 hours wasn't enough time to make any real preparation. The Alpha Cluster base was supposed to be their safe haven, a place to regroup, but now it felt like a ticking time bomb. They couldn't afford to be caught there. Not now, not after everything they had sacrificed. I'm setting course for the Alpha Cluster base, Mira said, her voice calm despite the storm inside her. It's our best shot. Kalen nodded, though his expression was still uneasy. I'll start the recalibration of our systems. But if we're detected, we'll be a sitting duck. There's nowhere to hide out there. Mira's mind raced. Their situation was growing dire, and every plan they made felt like a desperate gamble. The truth was that they were running out of options. They had poked the Dominion's hornet's nest, and now the swarm was coming for them. As if on cue, the shrill beeping of an incoming distress signal sliced through the cockpit's tense silence. Mira's hand shot out instinctively, tapping the console to accept the transmission. Receiving a message from the base, Kalen said, confusion in his voice. Mira frowned. Put it through. The screen flickered and then settled on a grainy image. It was a man, older, grizzled, and weathered by years of combat. His uniform was tattered, the insignia of the old resistance barely visible beneath the layers of grime and wear. Mira's heart skipped a beat. She knew who this was. It was Commander Rook, one of the most respected leaders of the original resistance, thought to have perished years ago. I'm guessing this isn't a coincidence, Mira said, her voice tight. Rook's weathered eyes narrowed as he addressed them. Mira, I knew you'd come. We've been tracking your movements ever since the core went down. It wasn't just a ripple. You've sparked something bigger, something that's going to reach all corners of the galaxy. But there's no time for pleasantries. You need to get here, and you need to get here now. The Dominion has already moved their fleet, and they're closing in on this location. Mira's grip on the controls tightened. The news wasn't surprising, but the sense of urgency in Rook's voice was. What's the situation on the ground? We've managed to stay hidden for now, but that won't last, Rook said, his expression grave. The Dominion's reach is long, and their intelligence network is extensive. They've already identified the cluster as a potential threat. We've got one shot at this, Mira. We need to act now, or the Dominion will wipe us out. Mira's mind raced. The Alpha Cluster was meant to be a strategic retreat, a place to plan their next move. But now, with the Dominion closing in, it had become a battleground. She couldn't help but wonder if they had made the right choice. Had they underestimated the enemy, or had they just delayed the inevitable? We'll make the jump to the Alpha Cluster in 20 minutes, Mira said, her voice steady. Prepare for an attack. We'll rendezvous there. You've got it, Rook replied. But be ready. There are no guarantees. The Dominion will bring everything they have. Mira cut the transmission, her mind churning with what lay ahead. The rebellion had started as a spark, a flicker of defiance against an empire that seemed invincible. But now they were facing the full fury of the Dominion's might. This wasn't just a fight for survival. This was a fight for the future of every living soul under the Dominion's thumb. And Mira knew one thing for certain. They had no choice but to win. Because if they didn't, there would be no one left to fight the next battle. Ready the team, she said, her voice cutting through the cockpit. We've got 20 minutes to prepare, and after that, we fight, no matter the cost. The shuttle's hull groaned under the strain as they entered the Alpha Cluster's dense asteroid field. Mira could feel the ship systems working overtime to navigate through the shifting debris. The tension in the cockpit was palpable, every crew member on edge as the minutes ticked down. Callan was monitoring their sensors, his eyes flicking to the distant stars as if searching for any signs of Dominion ships. Mira, Callan's voice was tight with urgency. We've got incoming. Dominion fleet, 3 capital ships and several cruisers. They're less than 5 minutes out. The words hit Mira like a punch to the stomach. It had come faster than they had anticipated. The Dominion had mobilized faster than they could have ever imagined, and now they were about to face the full weight of that power. Damn it, Mira muttered, her hands tightening around the controls. She flicked a switch on the dashboard, activating the cloaking system of the shuttle. It wasn't much, but it could provide them with the briefest of advantages. If they could avoid detection long enough to reach the base, they might stand a chance. But even as the shuttle systems whined in protest, Mira knew it wasn't enough. The odds were stacked against them. Rook had made it clear that the base was vulnerable, and with the Dominion closing in, they had no time to prepare for an all-out assault. Elara, get ready to work your magic, Mira called to her hacker, who was sitting at the back of the shuttle. If we need to disable their communications or anything else, it's up to you. Elara nodded without speaking, already plugging into her terminal, her fingers flying across the keys in a blur. Mira couldn't help but admire the young woman's talent. She had always been a ghost in the system, her skills bending technology to her will. But now, her abilities would be the difference between life and death for them all. As the shuttle entered the final stretch toward the base, Mira's thoughts returned to their mission. She had once dreamed of something greater, a revolution that would lift humanity out from under the Dominion's oppressive grip. But now that dream seemed like a fragile illusion. The reality was brutal. The Dominion had crushed all who opposed them, and there was no guarantee that they would succeed where others had failed. But there was no turning back. Not now. Mira had witnessed too much, felt too much loss. The people under the Dominion's thumb, her brother, Alden, those countless innocents, couldn't be forgotten. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about vengeance, about freedom, about a future where the Dominion would never again hold the galaxy in its grasp. Mira, we're coming up on the base. Rika's voice broke through her thoughts, her voice steady despite the impending danger. We've got a few minutes before the fleet arrives. Mira's eyes locked on the radar. The base was visible now, nestled within the field of asteroids, its long-abandoned infrastructure barely visible through the dust and debris. There was no guarantee that the Dominion hadn't already found it, but they had no other choice. They couldn't afford to wait. Prepare for a hard landing, Mira ordered, her voice calm but commanding. We'll fight from there, everyone on alert. The shuttle banked sharply as they approached the base, the asteroid field closing in around them. Mira's mind raced, calculating their options. The base had once been a haven, but now it was a battleground. The team would have to make every second count. As the shuttle descended, the faint hum of an alarm echoed through the cabin, signaling that the Dominion ships had breached the edge of the cluster. The countdown had begun. We need to set up defenses, Callan said, his fingers flying over his console as he assessed their options. We've got enough power to send out a few pulses to scramble their targeting systems, but that'll only buy us a few minutes. We need to act fast. Mira nodded. Rika, get to the perimeter. Elara, can you cut into their communications? Buy us more time. I'm on it, Elara replied without hesitation. The shuttle touched down with a soft thud, and the hatch immediately opened. Rika was the first to move, her weapon ready as she dashed toward the entrance of the base. The rest of the team followed, with Mira taking the lead. They had no illusions. The Dominion would not let them escape. The final battle was upon them, and this would be their last stand. There would be no more running, no more retreating. It was do or die. The base was dark, its once vibrant halls now silent and desolate. Mira's boots echoed as she moved through the corridors, her hand gripping her weapon tightly. The team fanned out, taking positions and setting up makeshift defenses. The Dominion would be here soon, and they needed to be ready. "Remember why we're here," Mira said, her voice low but strong. "This is for everyone they've destroyed, for every soul they've oppressed. We end this today, together." The team nodded, each of them knowing the gravity of what they were about to face. Jace, still unconscious, was secured in a corner, his condition worsening but still alive. Mira gave him one last glance, hoping against hope that he would wake to see the end of this battle. The distant hum of engines reached their ears, and Mira's pulse quickened. The Dominion was closing in. This would be their final test. In the darkness of the abandoned base, they waited. And as the first blast of energy from the Dominion's fleet rocked the structure, Mira steeled herself for the fight that would determine the fate of humanity. It was now or never,